Okay, so I was sitting at home the other day about to take a nap when a good friend of mine calls me up and he says, "Hey, there's a fantastic witnessing opportunity. You gotta head down to my shop right now." So without hesitation, okay, well, maybe a little hesitation. I mean, I was about to take a nap. I kicked off my slippers, put on my flip-flops, and I met him at his work. There in his office, he was sitting with a good friend of ours. It was actually the son of a mutual friend. And he had a bunch of questions about life and about Christianity specifically. I've met him before, but only briefly. Young guy, he's about 18 years old, and he calls himself an atheist and asserts that he believes in science. And I knew that in prior conversations, we had asked him to clarify what he meant by science, and the guy didn't have any response for that. Simply put, he was just echoing or parroting what he had heard other people say, and this is something that we all do, Christians and atheists alike. And what we do is we try to explain away our gaps in knowledge by referring to some authority, as like, "I heard a guy say," or "I believe in science," or "one guy once said." This isn't really knowledge, this is ignorance, and then we parrot it in our arrogance. So this guy had a gap in his knowledge, and this provided us as believers with a solid opportunity to help guide him through his thought process. So we shook hands and I asked him what kind of questions he wanted to ask. Without missing a beat, he looked at me and he said, "What about evolution?" I really tried not to smile. See, there are certainly those moments in life when we recognize that God has given us trials in order to prepare us for specific moments. Paul writes about this in Romans 5, and this was my Romans moment. See, it is the objective of modern evolutionists like Richard Dawkins to use Darwinian evolution as a marketing tool against the biblical God. By and large, the church's response has either been to ignore the question altogether or to accept it and try to squeeze it into Scripture. Both are incorrect and a total violation of the trust that we as believers are to have in God. The truth is, any thinking Christian can deliver a simple apologetic against evolution in just a few moments' time. So here is what I said to him. The truth is, I love this question. I actually told him that. See, so much of our culture has been brainwashed to believe that somehow evolution disproves God, but we're going to look at why this is not so. There are two ways to address this question. Two ways. We can address this question scientifically, or we can address this question philosophically. Absolutely philosophically. Number one, scientifically speaking, let me make it clear to you that I personally do not subscribe to any form of neo-Darwinistic theory, especially macroevolution. And macroevolution is really the heart of the argument. Nobody is really arguing that small individual changes occur within the boundaries of a given species. Scientists really don't even have a solid definition of what a species actually is. Microevolution, that some humans are tall, some humans are small, some squirrels are brown, some squirrels are light brown. That's not the argument. That's not the argument. This theory states that all life formed randomly by processes no longer observed in animals that we've never found. Furthermore, evolutionists claim against all biochemical evidence to the contrary that life came from non-life and one animal turned into a completely different animal. Let me give you a quick example as to why that doesn't make any sense at all. Try to imagine a mousetrap like this, okay? It has 5 moving parts, and each of these parts is interrelated. The wood board on the back holds everything in place. The cheese holder right here. The neck snapper. And, of course, the brace that allows the neck snapper to be held back also locks the cheese holder in place. And then, of course, you have the springs right here, which make the snapping mechanism possible. This is a really simple example, but check it out. The base, the spring, the cheese holder, the neck snapper, the lock. If any one of these 5 moving parts is gone, the whole mechanism fails to work. If the neck snapper is gone, it won't kill the mouse. The wood base is gone, it won't hold the parts together. If the spring is gone, the neck snapper won't shut down on the mouse's head. I asked him, does that make sense? He said yes. Now imagine that the wood base is made of paper. Paper! If it was, would the base be strong enough to hold the neck snapper in place? He said no. I told him he was right. So the mouse trap needs everything in place all at the same time in order for it to work correctly. Using this line of reasoning, the mousetrap could not have evolved slowly and gradually through time, since all parts are needed to be in the same place at the same time and in the right order and in the right quality. We can observe this, test it, repeat it, and make predictions with it. The mousetrap is irreducibly complex. Irreducibly complex. The mousetrap is irreducibly complex. Now compare that with macroevolution, or one animal changing into another animal. Fruit fly turning into a watermelon turning into a fruit fly, a cow turning into a tomato turning into a palm tree, fish turning into a human. It's ridiculous. Furthermore, macroevolution has never been observed, it's never been repeated, it's never been tested, and not a single prediction can be made with the theory of macroevolution. The mousetrap is science. Evolution is not. And you believe in science, right? He said yes again. I told him, great, me too. Let's move on. Step 2. Now we can look at this philosophically or epistemologically. And what that means is the proper way to think about evolution in terms of logic and reason. Something that evolutionists hate to do. So if you can be good as a Christian at mastering this apologetic and being logical and reasonable, then you'll have a good opportunity to help guide them through their thought process. Let's take a look at it philosophically. Let's say that none of what I said a second ago is true. Let's pretend that we see evolution happening every day. Let's see that we see, pine cones turning into rhinoceroses. New sorts of animals are constantly coming into existence. Little rock piles get rained on, and it turns into goo, which turns into a cell, and so forth. How does that prove there is no God? It doesn't. It simply reflects the mechanism that God used to create the diversity that we see today. Additionally, it would simply mean that Genesis 1 through 11 is allegorical rather than literal. Think of it as a poem rather than a narrative. I personally don't believe this to be the case, but we're just talking philosophically here. So something has to program the cell to evolve. If evolution were a law of nature, it would require a lawgiver, and that lawgiver is God. Here's another example. A computer cannot operate without a program inside it telling it what to do, right? Well, DNA is the same way. DNA is digitally encoded to work in a certain way. Someone had to program that code just like someone has to program the computer. As a matter of fact, Bill Gates said that DNA is just like computer code, only a whole lot more complicated. So evolution does not disprove God at all. If it happens at all, it actually demonstrates the process by which God works, which then becomes an argument for God. Does that make sense? Keep in mind that I'm going over the basic apologetic here. I'm not going to go into information theory or Shannon information or the fact that in order for natural selection to take place, one must first have a replicating mutator, which basically means that in order for natural selection or macroevolution to work, you need to have a biological mechanism that can already reproduce and already mutates. So I guess I am going to go into it a little bit. If natural selection requires that biological entity, then how did the entity get there in the first place? It doesn't make sense, philosophically or scientifically. The point is, most people are not prepared or willing to delve into the science or the philosophy behind their worldview. When you as the thinker can demonstrate the science or the philosophy to them with kindness and grace, remember, it's by God's grace that you know anything at all. Then you become a person with whom they have a personal relationship that they have come to trust, and they no longer need to appeal to some unknown authority. This is key. From there, you can explain how by knowing someone personally, we can learn to trust them, which brings us directly to the person of Jesus. My meeting with this young man was profitable. We spoke for another hour or so before he had to leave, and I had no desire to nap after that. Well, maybe a little bit of a desire, but that's not the point. I answered a lot of his questions and got a lot of smiles. We had a good conversation. We had some good laughs, and I hope to meet with him again, and I'm sure I will. I know that God is wooing him. He's pulling him in, and I'm grateful that God was able to use me to answer this guy's questions. Maybe next time he'll use you. This is Owen Hemsath, The Apologetic. To hear more from Owen Hemsath, please find me on Facebook, YouTube, or WordPress. Just search for Owen Hemsath or The Apologetic.